Spectrum, written by Ethan Cross Reed, read by Russell Bentley. Part 1. Isabel Price stumbled through the rusty door of the small corrugated metal shack and, ignoring the pain, ran as fast as her strong South African legs would carry her. Words like nightmare and why kept floating through the maelstrom of thoughts inside her mind. She felt lightheaded and nauseated. She stumbled over the barren terrain between each clapboard shack of the squatter camp. She had to know if they were all dead. She had to know if her boy was dead. Dingani shouted her name from somewhere behind, but she ignored him. She had to know, and her desire to know was so strong that no other thought could possibly enter her mind until she knew Tyler's fate. All she could think about was her boy. Her father's shouts joined with Dingani's. Elliot Price had always possessed a booming and powerful voice. It had served him well as a budding politician, back in the days when the white minority ran the government. Isabel ignored her father's calls. All she could think about was her boy. She jumped a fence and landed inside Mrs. Burley's herb garden. Isabel didn't give a second thought to the destruction of the kind old lady's property. If her fears were justified, then Mrs. Burley wouldn't mind. Because Mrs. Burley was already dead, along with all the other residents of the squatter camp. She kept moving, jumped the next fence, and came to a dirt trail beaten into a roadway by the feet of the camp's poverty-stricken inhabitants. She ran north and east and across 2 rows of the thrown-together shacks, each one of them slightly different depending on what was available when they were constructed. Most had dirt floors, with the residents sleeping on mattresses sprawled over the ground. No furniture, no running water. Ahead, Isabel saw her destination. A shoddy blue and white shack made of corrugated metal and 1x4s. She ran up to the tiny home's front door and knocked with enough force that she feared she may have damaged the clapboard building's structural integrity. There was no answer. No sounds inside, no signs of movement. Using her police training, Isabel kicked the door and burst inside with her flashlight and service pistol at the ready. This shack had been slightly upgraded compared to most of the others. She had seen to that, wanting her boy to have a better life than sleeping in the dirt. She saw Tyler's birth mother's body where she had been sleeping on a pull-out couch. Isabel fought the urge to vomit. They were all dead. But she still had to see for herself. She ran toward the back of the shack, where Tyler had his own room, the size of a small closet. Still, her boy loved having his own space. She saw the blood coming out from beneath Tyler's door, and she knew. There was nothing more she needed to see. Constable Isabel Price of the South African Police Service, or SAPS, had seen enough crime scenes and enough victims and enough pools of blood to know when someone was not walking away. And she knew that Tyler, like his birth mother, like everyone else inside this all-white South African squatter camp, was dead. Isabel stumbled out into the crisp morning air, knocking over half the furniture in her wake. She felt the whole world spinning. This had to be a dream. A nightmare. Any second she would wake up in the hospital after having endured a car crash, or a gunshot wound, or a brain aneurysm, and she would realize that this whole scene had been nothing but a bad dream, brought on by some slightly less horrible trauma. But this felt real. Too real. She didn't know what to think or believe. She just fell to her knees in the middle of the dirt path, dropping her pistol and her flashlight and not caring about dirtying up her nice new pantsuit. She crawled through the dirt, weeping, her tears flooding down her face and staining the ground. She didn't scream or say a word. Constable Isabel Price merely fell over on her side and curled up into a ball. Then she closed her eyes and prayed to wake up from the nightmare. But all she could think about was Tyler, her boy, with his head, hands, and feet chopped off, just like the nearly 300 other residents of the camp. 1 month later, he heard the low growls before he saw the beasts. The sound of paws and dirt, bushes rustling, then the roars and the screams. He ran, and one stepped in front of him, Anzarina. It batted a paw, toying with them more than attacking. His mother shrieked and dove at the beast, yelling for him to run. He felt warm blood on his clothes, but didn't know to whom it belonged. He ran and hid and listened as his mother was eaten alive. But since the recent deaths he had witnessed in a South African squatter camp, the dream had changed. Now, when his mother was being devoured, he was seeing through the lion's eyes and feeling what it felt. He sunk in his teeth and tore her flesh, pinning her with his claws. He felt the blood in his mouth as he devoured her entrails while she still lived. Then he felt something strike his shoulder, and he was instantly awake, reaching for both his knife and gun simultaneously. "It's time. Do your thing," Dr. Joanne Raskin said. Idris Madeira, or Kruger as he was known professionally, scowled over at the arrogant little American. He knew what time it was, and his internal clock told him that he'd been awakened 10 minutes too early. He checked his watch and confirmed the error. Sleep on a mission was often a luxury, and Kruger had learned long ago to take advantage of every moment of rest, because he never could tell when he might have to go days without closing his eyes. The target would be sleeping by now. He had decided to wait until 3 in the morning to be sure. His pompous accomplice had complained and argued that 1 a.m. would be more than sufficient. But he overruled Raskin on all operational matters. He was the professional, after all, and had carried out similar assignments on numerous occasions. The patient predator was always rewarded with the better kill. From the passenger seat, Raskin handed him the syringe and the tube containing the Q-tip without saying a word, like he was some hunting dog being taken off the leash and told to run. If he hadn't required the American's knowledge and connections to complete this final job, he would have ended Raskin long ago. The haughty American certainly deserved it, probably more so than anyone else he had ever killed. But such an act of indulgent, emotional violence would have been rash and stupid, and Kruger had learned to play the long game from years of hard lessons and painful mistakes. He stepped from the van and headed toward the small 2-story home. It was blue-green, with projecting eaves and a low-pitched gable roof covered in terracotta tiles. He had studied the layout of the house and the target's routines and knew that Fred Little would be waiting in an upstairs bedroom or asleep in his lazy-boy in front of the television. The Americans were so obsessed with their TVs. He and Zarina didn't even own a television. If he wanted to catch a soccer game, they would travel down to the local sports bar or attend in person. He had better things to do with his time than watch others live their lives. The preparations were all in place. Fred Little's house key had been stolen from his pocket, imprinted, and returned. The security system code had been acquired by watching through a window using a telescopic lens as Fred entered it. Kruger simply walked into the house as if he were the owner returning from a hard day's work. As he ascended the stairs, he hugged the wall with his size 22 boots, stepping up 1 foot at a time, knowing that creaks and groans were seldom found on a stair's innermost edge. His right hand held a black Beretta M9A1 pistol, with a sound suppressor threaded over its barrel, although he had no intention of using the weapon. It was merely a precautionary measure. When he reached the top of the stairs, he saw a dark face and the glow of eyes. He raised the gun as a reflex before he realized it was only a mirror. He stepped forward, and the image of himself grew larger. A large window over the home's foyer allowed the moonlight to illuminate his form, but he had to lean his 7-foot frame down in order to look into his own eyes. But were they his eyes, or were they Kruger's? He couldn't remember. He couldn't differentiate the line between Idris, the husband and father, and Kruger, the professional killer and mercenary who was spoke of in certain circles as a phantom. He had only allowed Kruger to be a mere shadow, a predator, a weapon, a tool used to print money for Idris. But now he couldn't decide if Kruger had taken over or lost all control. And then he was back in the squatter camp, going from house to house. He saw his own hands bringing down the blade over and over, chopping off pieces of what had once been people so poor they slept in the dirt. But in his ears, he didn't hear the ripping and breaking of sinew and bone. He heard his mother's screams and the growls of the lions. Suddenly, aware of his surroundings, he stood back up to full height and checked his watch. Cursing himself, he double-checked his weapons out of pure habit. He had succumbed to another fugue and had apparently been staring into the mirror for a full 5 minutes. On most of his missions, such a lapse would have resulted in his death. He was lucky that this particular target was sleeping peacefully and had no one to watch over him. But Kruger knew that luck only held out so long. It only took one mistake, 1 second of lost focus. He needed to get out of the game, and he needed to do it quickly, or he wouldn't have to worry about whether he was truly Idris or Kruger, because they both would be dead. He opened the bedroom door and crept inside. Fred Little slept on his back and was snoring like a bear. The thin sheet had been kicked away and only covered a portion of Fred's torso. He wore nothing but a white t-shirt and checkered boxer shorts. This routine had been verified on 3 previous nights using a remote-controlled drone to peer into Fred's bedroom window. Kruger gently moved the sheet aside and pulled up on the leg of Fred's boxer shorts. Then he retrieved the Q-tip from the tube and swabbed the injection site. The local anesthetic would keep Fred from feeling the penetration of the needle. He waited a moment to be sure the numbing effect had taken hold, and then he injected the succinylcholine into the middle third of Fred's upper thigh, straight into the vastus lateralis muscle. He waited a few moments for the drug to spread through his target system. As he waited, he watched Fred sleep. Kruger knew from his research that Fred was the youngest of 3 boys born to a wealthy farming family in rural Kentucky. His inherited money allowed Fred to attend college at MIT and study robotics. But to Kruger's eyes, Fred still looked like he belonged in the backwoods, hunting and fishing, with his auburn brush-pile moustache and long sideburns cut into a point in the middle of his cheeks. But Kruger definitely wasn't judging the man. He